Great, thank you. So again, my name is Curt Baranowski. I've been working on the Creating Resilient Water Utilities Initiative, which I'll refer to as CRWU, for about the past 15 years. There's a team of about 6 of us that all work on the initiative. Sorry, of course I'm having computer problems this morning. Okay, there we go. I just want to give you a little bit of background on what our mission is, and then I'll talk a bit more about some of the work that we do to support drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater utilities from a climate change risk assessment perspective. So under the initiative, what we do is we develop tools, training, and technical assistance to assist water sector utilities to better think through what their climate futures might look like by providing them with access to climate science data that's easily understandable, and then to help them think through how do they adapt to that potential future, and then also how do they fund those types of adaptive measures that they want to put in place. So all of our work is voluntary, it's non-regulatory, it focuses on adaptation, very little on mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. As I had mentioned earlier, this initiative's been in existence for about 15 years. We've built this out with a series of water sector stakeholders, so all size drinking water, wastewater, stormwater utilities, subject matter experts in the realm of climate science data, also many other federal agencies and water sector associations. So we've not done this in a manner that it is EPA developing some sort of initiative that we expect utilities to take on. We've done this in partnership with the entire water sector. So I want to talk about, before I talk about our tools and resources that will help you to better understand climate impact, I want to talk about our technical assistance first, because I think this is probably kind of, or giving you an understanding of this and what we do across the initiative is important. So over the past 3 or 4 years, we have been assisting or providing direct technical assistance to water sector utilities. So in FY23, so that's our October 1 of 2023, we assisted about 70 water utilities, in 24 about 50, and then in 25 we are expecting to assist 50 plus. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot in the grand scheme of how many drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater utilities are out there. However, we work with all different types of systems that help us spread the word about the tools and resources that we've developed that are all easily used by water sector utilities. However, we do provide this technical assistance. So we do have a call out right now for utilities that we want to assist in FY25, which starts this coming October 21st, or I'm sorry, October 1st. So if you're interested, you can email Eliza Furneaux, my colleague, and we'll get your name on a list and coordinate with you to see if we can provide assistance to you. I will tell you that for FY25, I think we have over 60 utilities already kind of requesting assistance, but that doesn't mean that we might not have the means to help all of them. But so if you're interested, like I said, please give us a shout out via email. So the technical assistance process, what this consists of, it takes typically 2 to 4 months, depending on the utility's availability, where we focus in virtually on a number of working sessions, 3 to 5 working sessions. We walk through a climate change risk assessment process using one of our tools called CREATE, which is the Climate Resilience Evaluation and Awareness tool. I will talk more about that later on. And what we do is bring together a team of subject matter experts. So folks that know how to use our tools and resources, a facilitator, a note taker, a climate science expert, as well as some engineers to kind of walk through the entire process. At the end of the process, what we do is pull together a funding call. So we get to talk to many different funding organizations, state and federal. If you look to the right-hand side of the screen, you can see some of the programs that we focus in on. And we are seeing success, excuse me, with connecting utilities that we work with into different loan and grant funding sources. So really good news there. We have a web page up on our website, which I'll provide to you at the end of this presentation, that provides some foundational information related to funding. So if you're curious at what's out there related to climate adaptation, I would encourage you to take a look at it. And one of the things that we like to do also, based on the work that we do directly with these utilities, is to tell their stories. So we have a case studies map up on EPA's website. It's a GIS-based website, so you can go in and either click on some of the dots that you see in the screenshot and get a one-page explanation or report of what the utility focused in on and how it's adapting to climate impact. Or you can search the map out via different threats that you might be concerned with. So this is a great way for utilities to share information among themselves as it relates to climate impact as well as climate adaptation. One of the things that I talked about the report here, this is just a screenshot of one of the reports that you would actually see if you clicked on one of the dots. This is the blurb, just kind of the background on the utility, and then this is the screenshot of the report. So nice one-page report, front and back, easy to understand. It makes connects into other utilities and resources. The other thing that we do under the initiative is training. So of course we can provide the one-on-one technical assistance that I just talked about, but we also train groups of people, typically if they're in person, no more than 40 in a room, and then we do some virtual work too. So we're planning that out for FY25, but in FY23, we had a really heavy focus on tribes. A lot of the virtual work that we've done over the past few years has been captured and placed up on EPA's website. So you can take a look at those trainings. I think they're very helpful. And then in FY24, which is this year for us, we are doing quite a bit of training across the board, 10 different workshops. You can see the rundown here. We did some work directly with American Water. EPA's Region 1 has a focus in on wastewater utilities and the permitting of climate resilience into new wastewater permits. So we did some training there on our tools and resources. And we continue, and we've also worked with RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, where we've provided training to their technical assistance providers. So when they're out in the field, they can help small and underserved utilities through a climate change risk assessment process. So we're trying our best to kind of reach out and, help everybody that we can. In FY25, we are going to do some sort of national webinar, which will focus in on our tools and resources and tell some stories about utilities and how they adapted to climate impact. We also plan on doing some in-person across the country. So if you're interested in any of this, we do put out a newsletter, sort of like on, I don't want to say a quarterly basis. We put it out when we have information that we think we should best share with the water sector, but it turns out to be 3 or 4 times a year. So if you're interested, you can sign up for that and learn more about the trainings that we're going to provide in FY25. I mentioned this earlier, but we do have a number of videos as well as trainings captured up on EPA's website. So if you look to the left-hand side of this screen, we have some videos of testimonials with different utilities that we worked with, and then also we've captured some of the more in-depth training that we've done for utilities and placed those up on EPA's website. They're just recordings of trainings. They're, I understand it's hard to kind of take the time to look at them because they're built out in basically 2-hour segments, and they can be 3 to 5 modules for each one of the trainings based on the climate region in the country. So we've done something in every climate region of the country. One of the great benefits of that is being able to get a bit more in depth on what climate impact looks like in that particular region. But even though they are a bit dry and difficult at times, and that's doing a very good job of selling you on watching them, there is a lot of great important information on the use of tools and resources that we've developed. This is interesting. This is something that we've been working on for years. I actually started this work, I think 10, 11 years ago now, where we pulled together a group of larger drinking water and wastewater utilities, associations, and then members of the financial community and the insurance sectors. So focusing in on bond rating, creditworthiness, and then climate resilience. So we do have a web page up on our website that has put out the findings of this working group. And we continue to work with them. There's going to be a second report with the focus in on risk assessment methods, disclosure practices, and climate data that will be coming out, I think, sometime in the fall, maybe early winter. And over the next year, one of the things that we plan to do is actually promote this work. So working with the financial and insurance sectors, going to different conferences. We're going to hold a webinar sometime, I think, in September. So again, a really robust, brilliant working group of folks. This is being supported by EPA, but this is these work group members that are putting out a lot of great information related to credit rating, creditworthiness, and climate resilience in the water sector, as well as insurability. So I would encourage you to take a look at this and sign up for the webinar that we're going to be doing sometime in September. So that's sort of a really high-level background of some of the work that we do to support utilities directly. Now I want to talk about some of the tools that we've developed under the initiative to better assist with climate change risk assessment at the utility level. So we've built out our Resilience Strategies Guide, or I'll refer to it as our RSG. This is an introduction to climate impact. So this was built out more for smaller utilities that maybe do not have the staff or the understanding, not that they don't understand climate change, just that they just haven't had the opportunity to focus in on climate because they're dealing with the day-to-day activities of just trying to keep their plants running. But this does give a good basic understanding of climate, as well as how to adapt to climate in the future. It provides strategies on how to do that based on the location and type of utility you are. And it also starts to provide users with some funding options. So this tool itself is web-based, but it's very easy to use. I'd say in most cases, a utility can use this and walk through it in a half hour to 45 minutes. The output is a report that actually can be then imported into CREATE, which is our climate resilience evaluation and awareness tool. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but the reason that I mentioned that here is so for users that have walked through the RSG process and they decide that they want to do a more in-depth analysis of climate impact at their utility, they have the opportunity to take the report that comes out or the file that comes out of the RSG and import it into CREATE, so they have a foundational start to actually be able to walk forward on or move forward on the climate change risk assessment. Oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. My apologies. This is just some of the information that you would see as you walk through the RSG. So I just kind of wanted to show you this. This is a focus in on the priorities that some utilities might encounter when they walk through the tool itself. And then what I want to move on to now is create. And this is a 5-module web-based tool. It's very unique. It's very flexible. I'm really not aware of other risk assessment tools that are out there that, certainly from a climate change perspective, that do this kind of work for any other infrastructure. One of the things that we try to do internally or within the federal family is actually promote the work that we do here in order to help other infrastructure sectors do similar work to help with climate change risk assessment in those particular sectors. But I'll just give you a high-level overview of each one of the modules. So the first is climate awareness. This is where a utility comes in. They identify their location, provide some basic information about the utility. In each one of the modules, you get a short report outside of the last one where it pulls everything together for you, which is very detailed. However, with climate awareness, the main product that you get out of this module is some foundational climate change projection data based on location of your utility. So we provide temperature data, we provide hot day data, storminess, temperature, precipitation, and sea level rise within CREATE, but we also have it mapped out on EPA's website, which I'll show you in a moment. Right now, what we do, I should say, with our climate data is we don't provide one number for utilities. What we do is provide a range of potential futures. So we provide 2 different time periods projected out to 2035 and 2060. We are working on updates to that data. The new time periods are going to be 2050 and 2090. We hope to release a new version of CREATE and our projection map, which I'll show you in a moment, over the next few months. So a lot of good work we're doing to better support climate projection data information to utilities. The second module within the tool is a scenario development tool. This is where a utility gets a basic understanding of its risk and designs scenarios of threats based on climate data. So you have the climate data in front of you, and now you're going to start to think through, okay, how do I design a scenario based on the threats in front of me? From there, you go into consequence and assets. So one of the things that we try to tell our users is, because I think the temptation is to look at every asset that's vulnerable to climate impact at the utility, we try to get folks focused in on 1 or 2 assets that, if we're impacted by climate impact, would provide some sort of significant either environmental, economic, public health impacts. Once you have an understanding of what that impact would be on that particular asset, it's easy to go back through the tool again and add additional assets. But it can get overwhelming if you start identifying every particular asset in the world of your utility. From there, we go into adaptation planning. So after you understand how vulnerable your assets are and what those consequences might be, it's how do you better protect them? What types of adaptive measures do you want to put in place? And we guide users through identifying different adaptive measures. We have a tremendous amount of information built into the tool related to cost of the implementation of adaptation measures. If you have your own data, of course, you can use that. It's easy to override the data that's in our tool. Same with the climate science data. Sometimes a particular state may want a utility or its infrastructures to be looking at a particular set of climate data, so you can override our data. I don't think that they're going to diverge all that much from set to set, but so just something good to understand with the flexibility of this tool. And then the final piece is the risk assessment module itself. And this is where you get a cost comparison of the different plans that you would have built out throughout the tool, focusing in on those adaptive measures you've identified, what those costs are going to be, and whether or not it's worth implementation currently or in the future. And one of the things that we also provide that I know the utilities really like is what is the cost of inaction? So if you don't do anything and you're impacted by some sort of event, what is that going to mean to the utility? As I mentioned earlier, each one of these modules, you get a report. This is the report that comes out of the climate awareness module that I mentioned already. This is the types of climate data you would see if you were to walk through the process. The tool itself is very easy to use. There's a tremendous amount of help and tutorials built into it, but for anybody that does choose to use it, excuse me, if anybody gets stuck along the way, EPA is there to assist, and I'm going to provide you with our information, my team's information at the end of this. I'll go through this pretty quickly, but we do have a number of either projection or historical weather maps up on EPA's website. So they all work the same. You can come in, you can click on the search, type in an address, a zip code, and you'll start seeing information related to stream flow, wildfire, snowpack, storm surge, hurricane strikes, and then our climate projection data. Very easy to use, very easy to understand. These are great resources to just get a foundational understanding of the different types of weather data that is out there. And then I always feel like with access to this type of data, it does prompt kind of the interest of conducting a climate change risk assessment. I'm not going to get into each one of these maps individually, but we do have a stream flow projection map, snowpack, which I don't know if any of you are interested, storm surge, inundation, and hurricane strikes. We've also mapped out the FEMA flood zones, and that information, the Federal Flood Risk Management Standard, there's a whole set of new information that has been released by FEMA. We're working to update that into our maps. We also provide real-time advisories related to hurricanes built into these maps that come directly from NOAA. So a lot of really kind of cool resources for utilities, either to be proactive or if they're in an event to take a look at what's happening in their area. We have our wildfire map, and then our climate scenarios projection map. This is the one that I'll focus in on a little bit. I mentioned a lot of this, I think, already, but we provide information for two different time periods, 2035 and 2060, for temperature, precip, storms, extreme heat, and sea level rise. And then we provide three different scenarios. So a hot, dry scenario, a central scenario, and a warmer, wetter scenario. So again, we aren't providing users with one number based on their concerns. We're providing them with a range of potential futures so that they can make decisions about how to best adapt to climate change. So the data that you see on this map is also the data that you see within CREATE. This is just a screenshot of, if you were to click on the precipitation tab, what you might see in the sort of, I think, what is northern eastern part of the United States. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, so I should be able to see that a little bit better. And then all of that data that we provide, there are folks that just want access to the raw data itself, and you can download it off of EPA's website. So, this is a public resource. It's a federal resource. It's taxpayer funded, so it's available to anybody for download. So we find that there are quite a few folks that are interested in this. And then we also have some focus on environmental justice. We're building that into our technical assistance processes as well as our workshop processes. And we've recently released a story map related to environmental justice in the water sector. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. I'm not going to get into any detail there. I talked about our technical assistance. So again, if you're interested, reach out to Eliza. And here's all of our contact information for the team, as well as our newsletter and our website. So it's a lot of information to share with all of you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
That is very impressive, Curt. These are great tools and resources. Appreciate for sharing all of these tools. Any questions or comments, Curt?
And the thing is, I know you're also pressed for time. I'm happy to answer questions, but you can easily email me if if you have follow-up questions too. Not that I'm trying to deter anybody from asking.
Okay. Not. Thank you, Curt, again.
Thank you for the opportunity. Much appreciated. Stay well.
Appreciate it. So the next presentation is by ICPRB Co-op on reservoir system and recent studies on water quality impacts of reservoir operations. And Dr. Cherie Schultz and Mike Selckmann would be presenting. Dr. Cherie Schultz is Director of Operations for the section of Cooperative Water Supply Operations on the Potomac at ICPRB. ICPRB's co-op section provides support to the Washington metropolitan area's regional water supply system. Dr. Schultz is responsible for water demand and availability forecast for the region, conducted every 5 years, which included estimates of the impact of upstream consumptive use of Potomac River flows and the potential impact of climate change, and is also responsible for management of metropolitan area water supplies and operations during periods of drought. Dr. Schultz holds a bachelor's degree in physics from Stanford University, a doctoral degree in physics from the State University of New York at Stony Brook, and a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Maryland. Go Terps. Gordon Mike Selckmann is the Associate Director of Aquatic Habitats at ICPRB. He is responsible for evaluating and assessing the habitat quality and biological health communities within Potomac waters. His work coordinates the cooperation of federal, state, academic, and local partners to find and implement solutions to environmental issues. Prior to joining ICPRB, Mr. Selckmann worked for the University of Maryland Chesapeake Biological Laboratory, Round River Conservation, in the Okavango Research Institute. He is currently the primary investigator and project coordinator for the ICPRB's Large River Assessment HAB program, North Branch Potomac Tailwater Optimization, and Groundwater Biological Studies. Mr. Selckmann holds MS in environmental biology from Hood College, a BA in biology from St. Mary's College of Maryland. With that, Dr. Schultz.
Thank you very much, Akli. Next slide, please. So I was asked to talk about ICPRB's co-op section. And our focus is primarily on water quantity, almost solely on water quantity, except for the fact that co-op staff do moonlight on the contaminant spill team. I'm going to talk about, whether there will be source water, and not so much about what the quality will be. So I'm going to give an overview on co-op. Why was it created? What does it do now? What's its role in the basin? And how we are helping, some of the things we're doing to help enhance water supply resilience. Again, from a quantity point of view. So this is a two-part presentation because I'm then going to talk a little bit about co-op's largest resource, Jennings-Randolph Reservoir, way up in the North Branch Potomac Basin. And really dramatic water quality improvements have occurred there. That's giving us some big opportunities for the North Branch region. So many issues up in the North Branch region and so many stakeholders. So their COP is involved to some degree, and ICPRB is involved on developing a new framework for collaboration. So the best person to talk about the North Branch is ICPRB's Mike Selckmann, who spends a lot of time up there monitoring, talking to people, and he has a great handle on this. Next slide, please. So how did co-op come about? In the 1960s and before, it was the Army Corps of Engineers that was responsible for doing water supply studies for our region. They came out with a study in 1963 that said, we may soon run out of water. And in fact, in 1966, a drought occurred and the Potomac hit its lowest flow on record. So people were very nervous that it was only a matter of years before the region would run out of water. People started working on this technically at ICPRB, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, doing technical work, what to do. And there was focus on how to use the systems approach to increase the reliability of the region's resources. And this systems approach showed that if the suppliers worked together, coordinated their operations, there would be more water, more reliability than if everyone went off on their own. A number of regional agreements were signed. One of the most important is the Low Flow Allocation Agreement in 1978. We're still talking about that agreement. I'll mention that again. This was prompted by the federal government. Congress was nervous, and it provided a formula for emergency allocation of water should the region run out. And again, people thought it was only a matter of time before we ran out of water. ICPRB established a special section, the co-op section. It consisted of all but one of the jurisdictions, Maryland, Virginia, the District of Columbia, and West Virginia. I've forgotten West Virginia on this list. And the federal government. Prior to the co-op section, ICPRB focused on pollution issues. That was its mandate. But the co-op section was allowed to focus on water resource and supply and availability issues. And finally, the agreement that really created the collaborative system in 1982, the Water Supply Coordination Agreement, along with some reservoir cost share agreements. This was signed by the main water suppliers, Fairfax Water, WSSC, Washington Aqueduct, the District of Columbia, and ICPRB. So this established the regional cooperative system that I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please. So just a brief snapshot of what the system is. It's kind of unique. It's an interstate regional system. Not many of those exist in the country. Fairfax Water, Washington Aqueduct, a division of the Army Corps of Engineers and the supplier of Washington, D.C., and WSSC Water are the suppliers that constitute the system. And they're actually the governing, they govern what our section staff does. The reservoir cost share agreements that were signed at the same time the Water Supply Coordination Agreement was signed in '82 provided cost share for Jennings-Randolph Reservoir, Little Seneca Reservoir, and Savage Reservoir. And those are the shared reservoir resources that we have. And finally, the Water Supply Coordination Agreement, it did a lot of things, but it requires coordination of operations of these three suppliers' operations during drought. And the technical administrative support for the system is provided by ICPRB's co-op section. So that's how we are involved in what the suppliers do. Here you see two of our most important reservoirs, Little Seneca and Jennings-Randolph. Next slide, please. A map of our system resources. And so here's why we worry about resilience. 78% of our metro region water comes from the Potomac River. We're very heavily dependent on a sole source of water, the Potomac River. And you can see on the map, there's a oblong circle where the metro area suppliers have their Potomac River intakes just above Washington, D.C., and just above Little Falls Dam. That's really our operational target where there's an environmental flow by. The rest of the water on average comes from 2 off-Potomac reservoirs owned by respectively Fairfax Water and WSSC Water. Those are the Occoquan Reservoir and the Patuxent reservoirs. And the upstream reservoirs I just mentioned, where there are cost share agreements, are used to release water during low flow drought periods. So those are Jennings Randolph, up again in the Potomac North Branch, and Savage Reservoir, that is operated by the Corps in conjunction with Jennings. And then a much closer reservoir, Little Seneca, is near to ICPRB's office in Montgomery County, Maryland. Next slide, please. So very briefly, what do we do in the co-op section? Under the Water Supply Coordination Agreement, one thing we do is drought planning, or will there be enough water? And we're required to do that every 5 years, according to the agreements. And, or the water suppliers are required to do this. And we've been doing this on their behalf ever since the requirement was put in place since 1990. And sometimes we also conduct special studies. For example, in 2017, after a number of our planning studies started indicating that there could be a problem during an extreme future drought, we evaluated a whole slew of water supply alternatives to compare and contrast how they can contribute to reliability. And when we do these forecasts, we forecast both water demands and availability. And of course, climate change now figures into our availability forecasts to a large degree. And we focus on whether climate change will increase drought severity during extreme droughts in our region. So we're focusing not on all the slew of problems that climate change might bring to our area, but just how it will affect stream flows. And in particular, how it will affect stream flows in a 100-year drought year, that is in a very extreme drought year, because it's only extreme droughts that really drive the results of our planning studies. So we do our planning studies using a daily reservoir simulation model driven by Potomac River flows and reservoir inflows. The other thing we need to understand is upstream consumptive use. There are water users upstream of the Washington metropolitan area, so we need to understand how their use is increasing or not, and how that's going to affect water flow in the Potomac River in the future. Here on this slide to the left, you see a data center park planned for Frederick County, Maryland, called the Quantum Loophole Data Center Community. It's a 2,100 acre parcel of land that's being developed into many data center, I think 20 data center campuses. And we weren't even thinking about data centers last year when we initiated our 2025 water supply planning study. And now we are. We have to try to understand to what degree water use by data centers upstream of the district is going to affect river flows in the future. And I should say, for us, the future right now is 2050. That's our forecast year. Next slide, please. Another of our roles is drought response. We have to make sure there's enough water this summer. And some of you might be aware that we started our drought response light phase drought monitoring on July 7th. And we do that when the Potomac River flow at Point of Rocks, Maryland falls below 2,000 cubic feet per second. thankfully, it looks like we're going to be out of drought monitoring by the end of this week. But when in our drought monitoring stage, we compile river flow and withdrawal data. Actually, we now have in place systems that automatically do that 365 days of the year, so we can keep testing our models. But we look at the flow and withdrawal data during drought monitoring, and we email stakeholders every morning, letting them know what's happening, letting them know about any unusual conditions, and that's what we've been doing. A more serious drought stage is drought operations, and we haven't gone into drought operations yet this summer. Drought operations has a lower trigger, and basically during drought operations, every day we review, do we need to make a reservoir release from Jennings-Randolph, from Little Seneca? So we compile flow, withdrawal data, and reservoir storage data. We report twice daily to our stakeholders. And we also, if we're really making reservoir releases, coordinate their operations, their use of Potomac intakes versus their off Potomac intakes to try to save reservoir storage when the river's up, try to use reservoir storage when the river's down. We're very dependent in drought operations on daily river flow forecasts. The Potomac is a highly variable river, even during droughts. It's going up and down, and we're trying to forecast needs tomorrow and needs in 9 days, because that's the amount of time it takes for Little Seneca release to arrive to the intakes, or a Jennings-Randolph release to arrive to the intake. Next slide, please. Finally, we also facilitate regional cooperation. Let's work together. And what we've been doing most recently is coordinating what we call the Supplemental Storage Work Group. It looks like the region needs more storage. We conduct drought exercises every year, except for years when we conduct drought operations. Recently, we've been supporting reviews and updates of regional agreements. This is something that our ICPRB commissioners have felt is important. This is one of their priorities. So certain co-op staff are working hard on this, and a related effort trying to put together a collaborative process to potentially review the Little Falls environmental flow by. I won't really have time to talk about that, but a lot of people here are involved in that. Next slide, please. So as far as enhancing water supply resilience, here's the two of the main things we're doing. First of all, we've joined in the effort to look for a new water source for the Washington metropolitan area. As I said, the area has a heavy reliance on a single source, the Potomac River. Mike Nardolilli did a review of major metropolitan areas, and we're really the most vulnerable in that regard in the country. It makes us vulnerable to spills in the Potomac River and to extreme drought. Another thing we're doing has to do, so the most recent things that have happened are a feasibility study was authorized by the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. The second thing we're involved in is updating, trying to support the Corps in updating the use of Jennings-Randolph Reservoir. And this is something Mike's going to talk about in a second. And this is in response to some language in the Water Resources Development Act of 2007. This language called for the Corps entering into an agreement with ICPRB to revise drought operations during drought emergencies. So far what we've done, so how to do this? The Corps has their way of doing things, and so we need to work closely with them. We've conducted a study called the Phase 2 Scoping Study. It's available on our website to really scope out how to make this happen. Next slide, please. As far as a new source, what have we done? We started thinking about this, the co-op water suppliers started thinking about this in 2012, 2013, 2014. And we contracted with Black and Veatch to study potential use of a local quarry for regional raw water storage. And these studies came out in 2014 and 2015. That quarry is named Trevilla Quarry. It's in Montgomery County, Maryland. We formed, as I mentioned, the Supplemental Storage Work Group in 2018 to start trying to make things happen. This is a coalition of stakeholders, including the water suppliers, the states, the Metropolitan Council of Governments, local jurisdictions. Now CISA is involved. We have a lot of people helping out. And the first great outcome was WRDA 2022, language in WRDA 2022. This was actually proposed by Congresswoman Norton, who we've been working closely with. Mike Nardolilli has been communicating with for the last several years. So the Corps, so Congress passed this language authorizing a feasibility study on a secondary water source. And the Corps has initiated this study just this year. They are going to consider all options, not just Trevilla Quarry, and they're going to come up with the best solution considering many options. Next slide. Lastly, updating use of Jennings-Randolph Reservoir. Just want to talk about how Co-op is involved with this, and then Mike's going to talk about Jennings-Randolph Reservoir. But this is our largest resource, our largest reservoir. It was completed in 1983 with the non-federal cost share provided by the co-op suppliers. So it's a federal facility, and these cannot be built unless there is a non-federal cost share. Releases from this reservoir take 9 days to reach the metropolitan area during drought. That's pretty slow. So though it is our largest reservoir, I wouldn't say it's our most important reservoir. It shares that with Little Seneca. Little Seneca is smaller, but nearby. And so we can get water more efficiently to the metropolitan area. But WRDA 2007 called for revisions of operations, use of water quality storage for water supply during drought emergencies. So there's 2 types of storage in the reservoir, and we are still working with the Corps on how to make this happen. And one thing the joint scoping study recommended is a drought contingency plan. So last slide, please, Mike. Just a little, last thing I want to say about Jennings-Randolph Reservoir. Again, it has two types of storage. Of course, there's really only one reservoir, but about 45% of the water in the reservoir when it's full at conservation pool level is, quote, owned by the co-op water suppliers and only released when we phone the Corps and say, please, we need water supply help, please make a release. This has only happened in 3 different years, 1999 and 2002. Those were moderate drought years, and also a small event in autumn of 2010. So that water basically just sits there, ready to be used if we need it. Secondly, about 55% of the reservoir is used by the Corps. It's called water quality storage. It's used every day for a multitude of purposes: downstream water quality, aquatic habitat, recreation. So how do we optimize use of the reservoir in general with these two types of water? And now I'm going to turn things over to Mike Selckmann.
All right, can I get a confirmation my microphone's working and everything?
Yes, I hear you.
Perfect. So I'm going to kind of shoot through the Jennings is a complicated system and there's a lot of moving parts. So to try and do this quickly, I don't think does it justice. I'll do my best. Here we go. So the first thing I'd like to point out to everybody is that the North Branch, when considering the watershed, came from industrial beginnings. A lot of, I guess, mining. There was a Luke paper mill. Plate glass has a very interesting history in the Americas, and it started out in that general region, kind of between Cumberland and Pittsburgh. More recently, tire manufacturing, plastic fiber textiles were in the area, and ultimately timber continues to be a resource in the Western Maryland region. Just something to point out, and I love showing these pictures. This is the area proximal to where Jennings Randolph was prior to the reservoir during the peak of mining. A couple things of note. There are no trees. So when you drive through Western Maryland and you see these lush forests now, they're all relatively young. I've heard numbers of 95% of the forested area in this part of the Potomac was basically cut, and this was just dry land. So there's a lot of sediment. There's a lot of acid from mining operations. There's flow alteration. All of this to bring home the point that the North Branch was considered an industrial river. It had utilitarian purposes, and Cumberland, founded in 1797, was actually the second largest manufacturing region in Maryland for a long time, competing with the Baltimore Harbor. This was a very rich area, rich in resources and economic value. So in 1923, when 15 to 20 inches of snow fell in a very short period of time, followed by 70-degree day a week later with rainfall to complement it, it flooded this economically valuable town. And you can follow it right through going to the capital, where the harm done in losing Cumberland to this flood basically shook the region and caused the hardening of Cumberland, is one of the terms for it, where they basically introduced concrete and concentrated flow lines to get water out of the area to protect this area as a resource. So if we consider our start point, this 1923 flood, by 1952, there was the Savage River Reservoir was put into place. There was the hardening of the entire watershed. It was an industrial application. This river was functionally dead. pHs were often around 4.5, and some of the lowest recorded pHs in the main stem were 2.3. To give you context, that's around orange juice. So right around the mid-60s, there was a slow economic collapse that put additional burden on the factories of the region. And in 1970, Jennings Randolph began construction, where it would ultimately be completed in 1982, 1983. What I want to point out on this graph, and it's kind of hard to see, but starting in the early 70s, we still see very low pH. As we move through the 80s, it's starting to stabilize, getting closer to 7. And currently, the watershed is basically stabilized. There are still pulses of acid mine drainage and other things related to its industrial past, but the watershed on the whole has improved. At this point, I'd just direct you to the North Branch Trend Report. There's a lot of details there, things beyond pH like conductivity, temperature. There's a lot of new water quality variables that we need to consider in this watershed. So between the mid-70s, mid-80s, we see a lot of environmental legislation come into play. The reservoir comes on board, and ultimately the watershed begins to improve. By the mid-80s, there was a cooperative agreement where the lifeless North Branch Potomac River needed to be addressed. And by the early 90s, we see recreation emerging. So things have recovered to a point where not only is the fishery improving, but we also have paddle sports like the World Championship of Whitewater. For the sake of being quick here, there were improvements across the entire watershed. The lime dosers reduced pH coming from acid mine drainage. There was reforestation and best management practices to stop sediment issues. Across the watershed, the North Branch River really elevated to the point where we're at today, where there is a very strong world-class fishery. People travel from around the U.S. knowing that this area has a targeted high-value fishery. The whitewater recreation is a backbone of the economy in this region. But what this ultimately introduces is, I guess, the idea where when the reservoir was put into place, water quality and water supply with flood control were kind of these opportunities for what was basically a dead river. And now we're introducing more and more, I guess, I don't want to say straws into the cup, where there's, we need to start considering the region as a whole. And we need to consider this socioeconomic trajectory of the region. So again, this is a formerly industrial river that we're seeing environmental improvement. We've seen the collapse of industry in this region. The historic Luke paper mill is actually being taken down right now. And the canal place in Cumberland is, I guess, slated to become a whitewater recreation zone. So serving the water quality needs of former industry, that's become less of a priority, but now recreation is getting more and more, I guess, of a seat at the table. So significant events in the last 5 years that will affect, or that affects the reservoir. We have the closure of the Luke Mill, and basically we don't know what's going to happen with the Luke Dam at this point. Luke Mill was significant because of the thermal discharge of water affecting the downstream fishery and the tailwater. That fishery has now extended down to, if you know the area, Kaiser, Maryland. The former tailwater used to be only 7 or 8 miles. It's now somewhere around 22. The task force of the economic future of Western Maryland has identified additional funding to maintain state-owned lakes, which is one of the tributaries to the North Branch, the Savage Reservoir. And they're identifying ways to enhance recreation opportunities in Western Maryland, again, highlighting the entirety of the North Branch watershed and all of its, the fishery and its access to camping and things like that. Biological improvement. With the Cumberland Dam coming down, there's a Potomac Eelway passage effort that includes dams 4 and 5, the Cumberland Dam, the removal of PPG, the glass dam that was there. Basically, fish passage is going to increase fish passage in this region, is going to introduce a lot of new considerations to this recovering system. So not only is there a higher vector for American eel to get back into the North Branch, but that also means the American eel being a host for freshwater mussels, there's a higher likelihood of mussel dispersal moving into the North Branch. How that affects operation of the reservoir, particularly when there are no records of mussels in the North Branch because of its industrial past, it's a new consideration. With recovery comes new biological targets. The natural reproduction of things like brook trout in the main stem, as well as cold water obligate stoneflies. That's another thing that can potentially reclassify the tailwater below Jennings. And there's questions about what Jennings can do to hold up these biological targets. One last thing I'd like to point out is that there's infrastructure shifts in the region as renewable energy replaces coal. Wind power has set up along the ridge. There's a lot of complications with this shift in infrastructure that I'm not going to have time to get into today. But specifically with Farallon and the potential for hydroelectric on Jennings Randolph, there are questions of we have storage and supply, but also the tailwater and what are the targets, what are the obligations of the reservoir to uphold certain biological and recreational targets as well. So moving forward, the cup basically right now is flood control. Again, think back to the history of why these reservoirs are out there, and the hardening of Cumberland. Recreation is was an added piece, but water quality and water supply are the main operational priorities of the U.S. Army Corps. All of these new emerging considerations, things like the biological improvement, climate change stressing temperature in the region, power generation and the infrastructure shift, and the economic priorities of recovering Western Maryland are all things that are going to have to be addressed in the discussion with JRL. And I think one of the most important considerations is considering the spatial extent of the reservoir. What is it capable of doing in terms of water quality, storage, things like that. And all of this leads to the recommendations for the North Branch. As Cherie mentioned, the drought contingency plan gets at the warm water, or the hottest portion of the year, but there are other scenarios that we could consider with the tailwater as part of the equation. Again, really complex, deserves its own talk. There's the spill plan on how acid mine blowout. One happened just last year. It was a small one on one of the tributaries to the North Branch. The obligation of the reservoir to flush out potential contaminants in this region is something that should be revisited. Ultimately, I think we need to reconvene a North Branch scientific task force to look at all of these emerging considerations in the watershed. The Delaware River tailwater is a really good example of, in times of drought and crisis, you prioritize some things over others. And this flexible flow management plan, this kind of conditional decision-making tool, is something that I think could be applied very well to the North Branch. So with that, that was a very quick run through of North Branch considerations. If you have any questions, I can quickly take them now. How are we doing on time?
We are 11:12 now. Not too bad, but we'll catch up.
Okay. So,
can I ask a question? Are we allowed to ask a question?
Go ahead.
Okay. You mentioned acid mine blowouts. I worked on Mentiki coal mine a long time ago, and they shut down like 15, 20 years ago, but they had to continue discharging at about, I remember, 6 or 7 million gallons a day to prevent an acid mine blowout. Do you know anything about that project?
I don't.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll send you some information if you're interested.
Yeah, I would love to get some more information on that.
Okay, I'll do that. That's it.
Hey, Mike, this is Priscilla from WSSC. Just real quick, do you see any monitoring gaps for the river water quality that we should be keeping in our minds?
So we just this year got the downstream temperature gauge with cooperating with Maryland DNR installed back at, it's around Kaiser, kind of where the river bends towards Cumberland. Temperature is going to be a big piece of water quality moving forward, because so many of the cold water obligates and the biological considerations for the watershed are linked to it. Conductivity is another one that there's an increasing trend in the watershed, and that's a product of the lime dosers. They're a Band-Aid, not a permanent fix. So there is water quality being taken there. In terms of data gaps, you know, just if you look at the report, the 2019 report that Cherie and I mentioned, you'll just see that there's just a real lack of data points on the main stem North Branch. And right now we're just doing everything we can to get more, benthic community fish data. We have a pretty high network of temperature and DO loggers. I didn't even get into the Conmon work that's being done out there. So yeah, it needs to be a discussion to what the priorities are for this watershed.
Okay, thank you. Amazing presentation. Thanks very much.
Indeed.
Okay, so with that, I can take one hat off and put the other one on, and I'll quickly talk about HABs. I'll see if I can, steal a little bit of time back. Does that sound all right with you?
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you, Mike.
All right. And I'll let the end, jump right to the end of it. Because of the fact that the Shenandoah HAB project, the HAB 30 project, which is funded through Richmond, is still ongoing, I can't share any raw data. I can talk about methodology and some general trends, things we're observing. So where the title of the presentation was initially focusing on the Shenandoah, I altered the conversation a little bit for just the Potomac watershed. If anybody wants to continue discussions, I can talk about the Shenandoah project with a little bit more detail. So nationwide, I'm sure you've all heard this plenty of times. HABs are on the rise. There's actually some interesting publications that have come out in the last couple of years that kind of question, are they on the rise, or are they a function of people now knowing about algae blooms, reporting them more frequently, the public having a concern? So there's evidence that HABs are increasing in frequency and intensity, but there is kind of an asterisk next to that mark. Generally, we know land use, precipitation, climate change in all of its parts are kind of how we quickly write off, yes, algae blooms are more of a problem. The devil's in the details with this project. We see shifts in the biological food web structure, and we see introduced species as kind of confounding variables in these discussions. So the HABs thing, ask a biologist, will always answer. It's complicated. One of the things to point out is, again, there's this economic impact of HABs and the visibility of it. As HABs are being more and more frequently reported, and we're watching the language shift to harmful algal blooms, dangerous, these kind of buzzwords, we see heightened concern in the watershed and its users. So the graph here is actually the annual number of news reports, not the number of HAB events. We see this explosion in reporting. And just to kind of bring it to home within the Potomac watershed, we go back 2019, the Potomac River, massive algae blooms, annual algae blooms reappear. But you'll see that the language starts to shift. Harmful algae blooms make the headlines, declares waterways damaged by harmful algae blooms, and then we start getting warnings making the headlines. So from just being a field biologist, talking to a lot of people, a finger on the pulse of this issue, these harmful algae blooms are becoming more of a scary topic to the general river user, and there's a lot of confusion around what exactly a HAB is. So where does ICPRB fit into this? We have these watershed scale tools. The first to bring up is the land prioritization tool, and kind of a plug for Heidi Moltz. They're going to be reviewing some of the metrics that are kind of captured within this tool. I see this as something that has really good HAB applications, distance to intakes, taking some of the biological data and plotting it within the watershed, and having our first kind of stabs at risk potential, things like that. Having a spatial look at the watershed as a whole is kind of a useful application of this tool that maybe wasn't in its initial charge. With that is our CHESI-BIBI tool, which is our index of biotic integrity for the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed. What's interesting is we can go kind of behind the scenes of this tool and look at anthropogenic stressors. We see community shifts in invertebrates at bloom sites. We also have land use variables that go into this equation that we can start manipulating this tool for HABs. Another application that ICPRB has done is real-time emergency spill monitoring. In 2021, 56.5 miles of the Shenandoah River were closed due to the risk of a HAB. It was a benthic attached HAB. There's a lot more we can talk about that particular HAB event. But when Hurricane Ida, or I guess Tropical Storm Ida, by the time it hit the Shenandoah, there was the potential for a lot of algal toxins getting into the water column and affecting intakes. So we went out and used our spill monitoring tool to get an idea of travel time, transport time of a toxin, and took samples alongside that model to see if dilution reduced the toxin load or if there was a toxin risk or anything like that. So we're taking existing tools and kind of bending them to fit this emerging issue. Finally, the Shenandoah HAB study. The best thing to do right now is to go to DEQ's website, and they have the topics of interest. It'll go through all of your what the primary objectives of the study are. It really is a baseline study. We're trying to understand what's out there, and frequency, intensity, those kind of things. Introduce some new technology to the watershed. Like we have a drone with hyperspectral imaging that we've deployed onto this project, and ultimately try and get to a tool that could eventually predict or provide early detection of HABs. The study as it stands right now, this is such an emerging issue, we really are focusing on baselining. ICPRB has worked with USGS, DEQ, George Mason, and Virginia Commonwealth University to develop and modify fieldwork methodologies for the Potomac watershed. Like I said, we looked at hyperspectral imaging technology. There's been some satellite work, but right now we're kind of focused on near-field drone flights. We're aligning universities with state and federal needs, getting their labs capable to process things like algal toxins. It's been a bit of a scramble getting everybody up and capable of processing these potential risks. And ultimately, the last point that I want to leave everybody with is we need to work towards a regional coordination for reporting. Right now, Virginia has a HAB reporting tool, but from talking to people like the River Keeper and those that live and recreate on the river, they don't know how often or where to make these reports. I know Maryland, and we see HAB reports pop up through different email chains, but understanding, are they similar species or are these different systems, understanding things like flow thresholds. We don't have a means to look at that right now because the data sets are too focused to individual problem spots, both temporally and spatially. So that regional coordination and reporting tool is something we need to work towards. With that, like I said, I feel like that was super fast for a complicated project. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Any questions? Yeah, Mike, we are in the middle of updating our water quality master plan. So these are very useful tools that we can use while completing those water quality master plans. So thank you, very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is Pam.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I have a question for Mike. So you were saying the Shenandoah HAB study is not completed. What is the schedule for completion?
Okay, so we've finished the first year. We're into our second year. And we should, the benthic collections and the response portion will end this October. USGS is continuing they have gauge stations bracketing the survey area that they've installed a FICO probe, nitrogen, Conmon nitrogen sensor, as well as all the kind of the deluxe suite of gauge station water quality data. They're going to run that into, I believe, January, end of December. And there's very, very early stages of, or do we continue funding the additional sensors and things like that? But ultimately, the field work portion of this project will end this year, and we should have a report out early next year.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Micah, this is Priscilla again. Can you go back a slide? Can you show the partners again?
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, how do the water utilities, as we identify the priorities to our utilities, how do we get involved in some of these projects, or how do we communicate to ICPRB or whoever starts some of these projects on getting involved in just maybe in the scoping process, or having our questions be known to the researchers?
So there's a kind of a couple parallel projects going on right now. One of the partners that's not here, they're kind of tangential to this HAB 30 project, is Virginia Department of Health. They have coordinated with a lot of the drinking water utilities. So like right now we have passive toxin samplers, spat samplers deployed throughout the Shenandoah that through separate conversations, reached out to the water utilities. But I guess that kind of gets back to the communication piece. It would be, if HABs are a concern, we have to have a coordinated group kind of get together and discuss when opportunities like this come up, how everybody can be involved.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah, I think that sounds
it's
important.
kind of a bouncing around question.
Yeah, well, I think your presentation helped us to see that there's so many competing uses, not competing, shared uses of the Potomac River. And there's different industries that are going to be affected by something like HABs, but we're one of them. And I'm glad there was some stakeholder involvement through the Virginia state. I'm wondering how we can increase and make sure our voice is heard in the projects that are important to us.
Yeah, I know there's interest, but at that point, I'd almost want to punt that one to DEQ and kind of what their vision is moving forward. Like I said, I think my scope ends beginning of next year unless we pick up additional work. So I'll let them know that there's interest, and we'll try and go from there.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. And
thank you, everybody.
Mike, my apologies, Mike and Cherie, thank you for the presentation. So the next presentation is on the effects of climate change on Maryland's water supplies in the Potomac River watershed. And Patrick Hammond will make that presentation. Mr. Hammond receives his BS in oceanography from the University of Washington, followed by service in the U.S. Navy as a submarine officer. He then attended the University of Tennessee, obtaining an MS in geology. He then worked for the Gulf Oil Corporation, and now Chevron, as an exploration geologist. After that, he was employed for 26 years by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the Maryland Department of the Environment water supply programs until retirement in 2013. He specialized in hydrologic studies of the fractured rock areas of Maryland. He completed a comprehensive regional study of the fractured rock areas of Central Maryland in 2022, as contractual employee of MDE. As a result, 7 white papers were published on the sustainability of public water supplies and the impacts of groundwater withdrawals. He started a study of the effects of climate change on Maryland's water supplies, which was completed as a volunteer assistant to the water supply program in 2023. As a private consultant, he completed an evaluation of the Poolsville, Maryland public groundwater supply in 2024, including the effects of climate change for the Montgomery Countryside Alliance. With that, Pat?
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. This talk reflects a portion of a report I completed for MDE on the effects of climate change on Maryland's water supplies. For the Potomac River Basin, I depended largely on many ICPRB studies. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, thank you. The effects of the 2001-2002 drought in Maryland provide a precursor for the impacts of climate change on the water supplies in Maryland. In 2015, 87% of the state's public water users were supplied by surface water, primarily from the Potomac River and Washington metropolitan area reservoirs and the city of Baltimore reservoirs and the Susquehanna River. Both of those major water suppliers had excess reservoir capacity remaining at the end of a near-record drought. This excess capacity, along with planned upgrades to each system, could mitigate impacts of climate change. Smaller communities supplied by surface water had to impose water restrictions during the drought due to limited storage capacity, or they had simple intakes and are likely to be impacted by climate change. About 85% of the groundwater use was taken from the confined coastal plain aquifers of southern Maryland and the eastern shore. These were unaffected by the extreme drought that occurred in that area, which is shown on this other slide. They are unlikely to be affected by climate change except for increased water demand due to greater outdoor water use. The remaining groundwater use was taken from the unconfined or semi-confined fractured rock aquifers of the state. Public water supplies of central Maryland were most affected by the drought due to declining oil yields and are likely to be the water supplies most impacted by climate change. Next slide. WMA reservoir releases of 6.1 billion gallons used to augment the Potomac flow during the 2002 drought lowered the water supply storage in Jennings Randolph and Little Seneca reservoirs to a minimum of 11.1 billion gallons, or 65% full. This was near the end of the drought on September 22nd. Also shown is a comparison between the 2002 reservoir storage and modeled storage under hydrological conditions that occurred during the 1930 historical drought of record. Figure shows that the drought of 1930 would have caused reservoir storage to drop to about, somebody just sent me, dropped to about 50% full, and it would have taken much longer to refill the reservoir than in 2002. The model demonstrates that the WMA water supply could have survived the record drought with remaining storage that would be available during a more severe drought caused by climate change. However, based on what I heard earlier, this could interfere with water quality storage. Next slide. Previous projections of water use in the WMA have substantially overestimated future water demand, as water use has remained relatively steady for almost 3 decades, despite continuing population growth. This figure from Ahmed et al. It's an ICPRB study by Ahmed et al. 2020. The the WMA population rose 41% over that period to 4.8 million people, while water demands had essentially remained constant due to falling per household and per employee use as a result of increased efficiencies of household and commercial water fixtures and appliances. The population forecast for the WMA is 6.1 million in 2050, a 27% increase from 2018. During the period from 2014 to 2018, total production by the three co-op suppliers averaged 453 million gallons per day. The average annual demand in the WMA, excluding Rockville, is projected to increase by 16% to 528 million gallons a day in 2050. Next slide, please. The ICPRB Hammond et al. 2020 study used a flow mass model to show the potential impacts of climate change on the yield of the multi-reservoir WMA water supply system for the years 2040 and 2050. It assumed the 1930s type drought under various flow regimes and water demand estimates, with changes in operational procedures and addition of reservoir and core storage. The ICPRB climate change predictions indicate that the mid-Atlantic states would get wetter while temperatures are expected to rise. The colored sections for the system performance are green for reliable, yellow for marginal, where the maximum Potomac flow deficit is less than 1 million gallons a day, and red for system failure. Next slide, please. This table from Hammond et al. 2013 contains Potomac River basin-wide averages of annual precipitation, evapotranspiration, storm flow, and base flow for a base scenario from 1988 to 1999 and 18 climate change scenarios using 6 climate models and 3 emission scenarios. Evapotranspiration increases in all scenarios due to elevated temperatures. The average precipitation increases in the Potomac River Basin in 7 of the 18 climate change scenarios. In those cases, the range of average year base flow versus the base scenario is 88% to 104%, and for stream flow is 90% to 111%. Global, national, and regional climate models, as well as information in the previous slides, support these scenarios. Precipitation decreases in 10 other scenarios with an average year base flow range of 66 to 88% and a stream flow range of 65 to 89% relative to the base scenario. Next slide, please. These are water availability predictions from the ICPRB Schultz et al. 2005 study for the annual and seasonal water budgets in the Monocacy River and Catoctin Creek watersheds. MDE allocations are based on an adjusted 10-year annual average or drought base flow, which is significantly higher than the seasonal drought budgets in this table. Allocations based on the seasonal water budgets would likely preclude any significant development within the state's watersheds. During the drought of 2001-2002, withdrawals from Hollow Branch in Middletown, Horseman Branch in Poolesville, and Woodville Branch Upper Linganore Creek near Mount Airy likely caused substantial biological impairment of those streams. Evidence indicates that the biological integrity of Hollow Branch and Woodville Branch Upper Linganore Creek was restored once the drought ended. Horseman Branch was still impaired due to an overallocation for municipal water use. Next slide. In the Schultz et al. 2005 seasonal water budget analysis, subbasin precipitation, stream base flow, aquifer recharge, total evapotranspiration, and other water budget components were computed for the period from 1960 to 2002. The model assumes Withdrawals are the sum of available recharge and storage, which would be much higher during the winter months, or Q1, than the summer months, Q3. However, water use by municipal water suppliers is much lower during the wintertime and higher during the summertime due to outdoor water use. In the case of domestic users, much of the water withdrawal from their wells is returned to the aquifer through septic field discharge. Next slide, please. This is a groundwater flow model designed to measure the sustained yield of the Poolesville public water system. I reviewed the result for a report I prepared for the Montgomery Countryside Alliance and made the following suggestions. Change from a horizontally isotropic to an anisotropic aquifer and revise the aquifer constants. Assume drawdown to reservoir units, not water-bearing fractures. Include a potentially low permeability barrier north of the town. Assume a seasonal variation in water availability similar to the Schultz et al. 2005 study. Assume a seasonal variation in drought year water demand and include a reduction in recharge due to climate change. This may be the best site in the Potomac River watershed where a reliable groundwater flow model of this sort could be constructed by ICPRB or any other agency. Next slide. For your further review, I've included slides with notes on domestic well replacement during the 2002 drought, Baltimore City water supply operations during the drought, and the effects of sea level rise on the water supplies around the Chesapeake Bay. That's the end of the talk. Are there any questions that you would like to ask?